Good evening, and welcome to episode 83 of the Political Mike podcast. An election that has defied history. That's how this election that took place this past Tuesday has been described by many historians and many political pundits. Since 1994, the Republicans have controlled Congress more than Democrats. The GOP has held the Senate for about 16 and a half years, counting the roughly half year before the party cost their majority in 2001. And Democrats for only about 11 and a half years. The imbalance in the House has been even more lopsided. Republicans have held it for 20 of these past 28 years, and Democrats for just 8. Especially ominous for Democrats is the fact that if they do lose the House, which all trends seem to be indicating, it would mark the second consecutive time they have surrendered their majority, only 4 years after regaining it. The previous case came when they swept the party uprising in 2010, just 4 years after they recaptured the chamber in 2006. By contrast, Republicans held the House for 12 consecutive years from 1994 through 2006, and then for 8 from 2010 through 2018. Historians have looked to precedent, going all the way back to John F. Kennedy's time, to indicate that this was going to be an election that was a repudiation of President Joe Biden and his policies. Every time the president in office, the party in office, and the White House takes power, it always seemed as if the Congress went in a different direction. But last night was different. And so forever, there'd always be an asterisk behind 1998, the election in which Democrats took back the House, 2002, an election that took place on the heels of 9/11 with President George W. Bush, and now 2022. The first election after the January 6th insurrection. This past Tuesday, the stage was set for a triumphant scene. A spacious Washington ballroom, a sparkling lectern flanked by American flags, the words "Take Back the House" plastered in big letters on the wall behind it. Heading into the November 8th midterm elections, Kevin McCarthy, the House GOP leader, and many other Republicans like Senator Ted Cruz, and even some political talking heads were saying that the GOP would have much to celebrate. But the triumph never materialized, and as the night wore on, neither did McCarthy. The bar closed, partygoers limped toward the exits, and finally at 2 a.m., McCarthy emerged to proclaim what he wished to be true. He said, "It is clear we are going to take the House back. When you wake up tomorrow, we will be in the majority." But as the dust settled on a most unusual election, most signs still pointed to McCarthy's prediction coming to pass, but by a slim margin that surprised both parties and shocked the political world. Here to help me make sense of what happened this past Tuesday night are some of my favorite guests I've had on the Political Mic. We're going to be joined by some others shortly, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce them to you this evening. We have Professor Fred Cook, who represents a wide range of clients in the areas of government relations, municipal law, and corporate and land use matters. Since 1986, Professor Cook has served as an adjunct professor of the Howard University School of Law. He also served two terms as a member of the Board of Governors of the DC Bar and as a member of the DC Commission on Judicial Disabilities and Tenure. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees of the DC Public Defender Service. Thanks for being back, Professor Cook. We also have Mr. Zach Tolan, who's a practicing attorney and a recent graduate of Howard Law, and Professor Preston Foster, who's the founding president and CEO of whattheyshouldsay.org. Mr. Foster is an assistant professor and program director of public policy at Oakland University and is also a regular panelist on WJOU's monthly issues and policy radio program. He served as U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Education in the Clinton administration and also won a White House Fellowship in 1994. We're also going to be joined by Ishmael Ibrahim, who is also a practicing attorney in the Chicago area. He's also a graduate of Howard University School of Law. So, gentlemen, thanks for making time to be on tonight. We're going to go ahead. Let's go ahead and open the discussion with this question that I've been wanting to ask you all. Was this election more of a vindication, in your view, of Democratic policies or repudiation of the GOP? Anyone can jump.
Well, I'll jump on in just to get the ball rolling. And good evening, Michael and Zach and Fred. It's good to see you all. And it's good to meet you as well. I believe it's more of a repudiation of the Republicans. I think the message of democracy being on the ballot um, got to a lot of Americans more than I thought, frankly. And also, I believe, and I feel two ways about this. I think the Democrats' cynical strategy of passively helping the Trump election deniers get on the ballot did work politically, although I think that it's reprehensible civically. And I know that that's probably naive and worse politically, but as a citizen and as an observer of the Democratic National Committee over the years, I just don't think that they're that good. I think that playing with fire like that is a very dangerous thing for the country. But I think in large, it was a repudiation of the craziness that's lingered over our country since Donald Trump took office in 2017.
I tend to agree as well. I think especially given that the economy is where it is right now, it wasn't, and a lot of people love to blame spending whenever it happens on or for economic woes, and that's tends to be seen as a Democratic Party mainstay. No, I think a lot of what happened was because of a lot of the Republican policies and the connection of the Republican Party to abortion, the abortion issue, regardless of where you stand on it. And also, speaking as a Pennsylvanian, had a lot to do with the particular candidates who were running. We had a doctor who wasn't from the state and who was out of touch with most of the state. Also a Cowboys fan, which I can't imagine helped him with anybody. Certainly not in Eagles territory. And probably one of the most extreme characters I've ever seen run for governor. I was terrified, by the way, that he would pull it out. But I think a lot of it had to do with a lot of people who were running as well. And as Professor Foster mentioned, the DNC did put some money actually behind getting the most extreme candidates for the Republicans on the ticket, which was risky, but thankfully, at least in Pennsylvania, it seems to have worked out.
Let me introduce Dr. Blaine, who just joined us. She's practiced medicine for over 30 years and watched the changes that have turned. Patients into customers and medicine into an industry whose sole objective is profit. Her book, Undue Influences, was written in response to the wave of extremism that has fractured our communities and in which so many have asserted their opinions simply by following their friends, their political party, and the barrage of fake news that abounds. From both sides of the political aisle, when the most respected medias present their news articles written in the first person, she said, we are hearing only opinions disguised as fact, and so this is what inspired her to write the book, Undue Influences. Dr. Blaine, thanks for making time and being on the political mic tonight. And again, the question is, was this election more of a vindication of Democratic policies or repudiation of the GOP? Keep in mind that there are still votes being tallied right now, of course. As of this moment, the Democratic Party has a slight disadvantage in the Senate. There is going to be a runoff in Georgia between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. But at this moment, it seems as if the Democrats are, in a good position in Arizona. Mark Kelly's with 70% of the reporting at 51.5%, slightly ahead of his opponent. But in Nevada, however, Adam Laxalt at 49.4% with 83% of the reporting coming in that state. You also have Georgia, which is outstanding, which would take place on December 6th. That runoff is on December 6th. And so, it doesn't seem as if the Republicans had it at all the night that they were looking for. The one term that the Biden White House used after the Tuesday's elections was vindication. And so, were they onto something? Was this a vindication in your view?
I'm not so sure it's a vindication. I mean, I think that I tend to agree with Professor Foster and Mr. Tolan that this is more of a Republican loss than a Democrat win, if you will, kind of proposition. I think that the Republicans rather, ran a bunch of very bad candidates, a bunch of candidates that were really inconsistent with where most people were. But notwithstanding that, many of the elections were relatively close, and not they weren't just sent away. They were defeated and soundly, I guess, in most cases is a word to use. But in other cases they were very close, and that's troubling. Like Professor Foster, I was surprised because I guess the cynic in me said that this thing has gotten so out of whack that there's just no real way to pull it back to sanity. But I think a lot of the things that people think about, good things about American politics, held true this time around in large form. And but I think people rejected the negativism, the lack of real policy agenda, the stuff that just didn't give government a chance to do anything for the people that the government supposedly is there to help. So I think Democrats have still a lot of work to do to try to develop more support among a broader group of people. And I don't think the so-called Republicans are going to go away. So that fight's still going to have to be had.
And I would also agree with everything I've heard tonight. I thought it would be a bigger push for Republicans, but I am presently surprised to see that I'm happy they got punished for challenging the system by which all of our institutions rely on. So I'm happy to see that, and I do, from what I've gotten, that was the biggest thing that came off negatively for them, because the Democrats were facing a lot 6 months from now, when, especially in blue states, with Democratic governors upholding COVID procedures that were seen as lasting too long and a number of other things. But I think the Democrats closed the gap quite a bit, and I'm interested to see where it ends up. But I'm happy to see the Republicans were punished for the lack of for their behavior in the democratic process over the last few months or year.
I personally think it's a bit of both, because even with a very unpopular Democratic president and sky high inflation and gas prices and all of that, we did see a lot of vulnerable candidates running in support of Biden's agenda, in support of the Inflation Reduction Act, in support of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and get reelected. For example, Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. But on the other hand, like Professor Cook said, Republicans ran very bad candidates in a lot of places who only very narrowly lost. And that kind of got papered over by the fact that in many places the narratives kind of outran the polling and what was actually in front of people's faces. Abortion really was a big issue in this midterm. I think it was the second largest issue after the economy. But by October and September, turn on any political news station and the big thing was crime. So the narrative was making a lot of people lose sight of reality.
I was very happy to see, I think surprised, which makes me wonder about, where my head really is. But I expected worse from the American population. And so I'm, guilty as charged on that. I'm really, really pleased to see. And I also agree. I think it was more of a move against the MAGA, especially the MAGA Republicans, than it was necessarily always for the Democrats. And it sort of, reinforces the idea that I call them sycophants, and I don't understand, because Trump will turn around and trash them the next minute, even if they genuflect in front of him. But I think that people are tired of that, and people were seeing through that and rejected that message that's been really big for a long time, and it makes me feel much better about America. We got a long way to go, but these people, these vocal people, are still a minority. They're not the majority that they think they are. They're just really loud. And I like to think that there's a lot of sane, rational people who are just quiet, and we don't hear from them.
So Republicans' biggest cause for celebration was in Florida, where they swept the state house, and Governor Ron DeSantis won a huge victory against Charlie Crist, his Democratic opponent, who himself was once a Republican, and he was the governor while he was a Republican. But the Republicans retained Senate seats in Ohio, Florida, and Wisconsin. Mandela Barnes came up a little short in Wisconsin. Marco Rubio won in Florida against Val Demings soundly early in the night. That was one of the first calls. We even called it on the show when it was still live. Ohio was the one that really hurt me, because I thought Tim Ryan, and I said it before in this program, I said it repeatedly, Tim Ryan was my favorite candidate throughout this entire process. I think he was a tailor-made candidate for the state of Ohio. I asked Jamie Harrison when he was on the show, I said, why is the DNC not investing more in that state? It looked like if there was anywhere to allocate more funding and allocate more television ads and everything, it was Ohio. And he made an effective case. I think I watched all the debates. I think he really made a huge case against J.D. Vance, who tied himself up with January 6th insurrectionists, who at once gave a rebuke to Donald Trump only to come around and kiss up to him again. Tim Ryan just didn't hold back anything. I think he made an effective case for democracy, while at the same time making an effective case for the economy, which was something that the Democrats overall needed to do for this election, I think. And I think he succeeded. And then in his concession speech, it was a rebuke to all of the folks who ran on platforms of, I'm going to overturn the election in favor of Donald Trump if I get in. Folks like Carrie Lake, who's still, that race is still undecided in Arizona. But his concession speech said, I have the privilege and honor of conceding this race to J.D. Vance, right? Because that's how our system works. This is how our democracy is supposed to function. And if we don't have losers, if we don't have winners, then we don't have democracy. So I want to ask you, who are the biggest winners? Who are the biggest losers in your mind? I think for me, I'll start off by saying Biden was the winner. They have this since Biden was a candidate for president. There has been this caricature of this old, senile man who's out of touch with the electorate, who's constantly going to fail, right? I had folks laugh at me. I was supporting Biden since he announced on April 25th of 2019. And after the Iowa caucus, which was a mess, after Nevada, people were saying, you need to find a different racehorse. And I said, no, I'm going to hold out until South Carolina. Then the narrative changed to, how is he going to campaign effectively from a basement, right? It's COVID and he can't get out there and campaign with the people, so he's not going to be effective. And Trump is going to trounce him in the debates. And I'm like, listen, the primary season debates are not the same kind of environment as the general election debate, right? And lo and behold, we saw Trump malfunction on the debate stage, right? Biden comes out looking like, an adult, right? And then after that, when he gets the presidency and everything, Manchin and Sinema are just going to derail his legislative agenda. He can't move forward after the American Rescue Package, after the infrastructure bill. It's a done deal. Next thing you know, Chuck Schumer and Manchin come out this summer with a deal, right? With historic investments in climate. Time and time again, the expectations for Biden are set so low, and time again he defies the odds and always comes out on top. All of the pundits, all these Democrats talking about, I don't know if I'll support him in 2024. If he's the nominee, if he runs, people constantly ask him if he's going to run. You have a president right now in modern history who's been the most successful president coming out of a midterm. Better than Obama. Obama lost about 63 seats. Better than Clinton. Clinton lost about 30 seats, right? I don't understand why folks keep undermining him and constantly setting the bar so low for him to exceed. It just doesn't make sense to me. The DNC is a loser to me. It came out, I think if it's not kicking itself, it needs to. Cherry Beasley came way too close to winning that North Carolina Senate seat, for us not to feel as if, for the Democrats not to feel as if there was a missed opportunity there. Same in Ohio, like I mentioned earlier. Anyone else?
Well, I mean, I will just initially say that I think, as a lot of us, at least here tonight, were throwing out there, I'm not sure how much of Biden's success on Tuesday is necessarily related to President Biden. A lot of it definitely had to do with who was running against the Democratic Party. I don't think nearly as many people who voted were. I don't think nearly that many people who voted the way they did were voting because they were identifying with who President Biden's chosen candidate was, as much as against who, for instance, President Trump's candidate was. Also, he has been more successful than some people give him credit for. But at the same time, Donald Trump got a lot more done than people expected him to get done. There's also the fact of the lower you put the expectation, whenever he gets something done, it looks like an amazing achievement. It's not to say he hasn't achieved anything, but I think there's a difference between being critical of President Biden, noting that he is still not incredibly popular nationwide. I think he's still polling around the 40s, which isn't bad. It's not great either. It's not the lowest the president's ever been. Certainly not the highest the president has ever been.
It's low.
But then there's also the fact that he is a very old man, and will be even older in 2024, to the point where not just most of the country, but I think over 80% of the country will be at least a decade younger than him, in an ever increasingly important nation that is younger, with more very young people entering. We saw that on Tuesday, the number of Gen Z. We got our first Gen Z member of Congress, and Gen Z came out to vote like crazy. So I think there's also to keep in mind that it might be time for our old man of the Senate and of the White House to step aside and let some younger blood get in.
Zach, Trump is what, 70?
It doesn't come off the same.
Let's get younger people in general.
No, but
Be
they
very
both
careful
come off
here.
as very different.
I'm looking at you, Professor Frost.
Be very careful here.
We're going in a bad direction.
No disrespect whatsoever to anyone who is older than me or anyone else. But
every 70-year-old is not built the same.
Late 80s.
Okay, hold on. I hear you, right? I hear, but this is the thing: the caricature that the MAGA folks invented, this Brandon they created. When will they realize this character doesn't exist, right? Mm-hmm. This incompetent character doesn't. Biden has been, his legislative agenda, successes, causes Trump's to dwarf in comparison. What did Trump get through? Tax cut, right? He couldn't even get, the Obamacare that they've been wanting so badly to be repealed. He couldn't get that repealed, right? And so when you look at their legislative accomplishments just in the span of 2 years, right? Let's look at Trump from 2017 to 2018. Let's look at Biden from 2021 to now. Who has more legislative accomplishments, right? I would put Biden's record up against Trump's any day of the week.
But it's about who inspires confidence, and it's a different kind of individual who Trump inspires. But the point is that, like, when you see, I thought that's what Zach was getting at with that comment, because every 70-year-old isn't the same 7-year-old. Like, individuals are different. But with Biden, when he talks, and I agree with you, most of the things that people try to highlight as big gaffes in his, intellectual capacity, I don't see. Sometimes I do see them literally fabricating things. And when I say they, I mean things on social media and in the world. I don't have any particular source, but it does come across to me that Biden isn't full of vigor that I would like to see in a president that's leading the nation. I feel as if he's, I'm hoping and praying that he gets to a sentence and like in any kind in kind of an expeditious manner, because it doesn't inspire confidence. And like I don't think I'm the only one who gets that when you hear Biden and see him move. It's not a president who seemed like he can rip and run. And Trump, whether you think his age should defy that at all, he does give the impression that he's quick, he's sharp. Like Biden, it just seems like it takes him forever for his mind and the wheels to turn.
I think the problem with that is that you're looking at them in comparison, Biden versus Trump. To me, Trump didn't strike me. I wouldn't call it quick or sharp. To me, he was manic. And I say that as a doctor. I mean, he was all over the place, scattered. My blood pressure was up all the time. Every time he was saying something, everything was a crisis, another crisis, another crisis. He was posting and tweeting 17,000 times a day. And it wasn't, there was so much energy with it, but it wasn't productive energy. But people pick up on all that energy. Whereas Biden he's much more staid and rational. And to me, I felt like when Biden was elected and when he took office, it was like, I can relax. I don't have to, it's not constantly in my face that there's all these problems. So you're contrasting two extremes. And so, depending on where you are in the spectrum, you're not going to see that person. Like if you were to take Biden and look at him next to Bill Clinton, for example, he has, I don't know, there's not as much of a difference. Clinton, I think, had a little more energy, but Clinton was a lot younger. And I really like Biden, but I hope he doesn't run because I don't think he can win. And I don't think he can win because he's older. And Donald Trump is not that far behind him, but he's like a pistol, so, and he could burn himself out. He could, I'm not wishing anything bad on anyone, but I mean, he could have a stroke tomorrow with the way he eats and the way he, his health and whatever. I mean, I look at him and I think metabolic syndrome. That's what I see. I see metabolic syndrome and I can't not see it, and that comes with all kinds of risks. But to the average person, he has so much more energy, but it's not productive energy. It's just throwing that stuff out into the world, but it makes anyone else pale. If you're comparing them, if you don't really look at what's actually being done, what's actually being said.
I think Mike has
Professor.
I think obviously Fetterman was probably the biggest winner in terms of flipping a state. I think that Ron Johnson winning was my biggest disappointment. I just think he's an atrocious public servant, and that's giving him a compliment. But I think the biggest winner really was DeSantis. The fact that he won so easily, that Rubio won so easily, that Dade County is now reliably red, puts DeSantis in the position, if you couple that with the repudiation of the MAGA bad candidates, it puts DeSantis in the driver's seat as the alternative to Trump. Having said that, I also believe that Merrick Garland has let us down again, because Donald Trump will announce this coming Tuesday that he's a candidate for president, and he will do that likely without being indicted for anything regarding January 6th. So I think that Merrick Garland waited too long to pull the trigger on that. I know that there are probably very good prudent legal reasons to do that, but it puts the country in a bad position, because we will be back in this Trump-driven cycle. Not that we wouldn't be there with him not being indicted, but now he has the benefit of being able to say that all of this is political, not criminal. I also think a big winner was Chuck Schumer, and I feel divided about that. Obviously, I believe that if the stars align, that the Democrats will hold the Senate, which is very important. But in doing so, I believe it continues this geriatric cycle that we're in the Democratic Party.
So, Professor, to your point about DeSantis, I've heard a lot of folks ready to coronate DeSantis as the heir apparent to the MAGA movement. And although he may seem attractive to me, in my view, I'm looking at the fact that they had a straw poll in Florida, and they also had a different straw poll in different Republican states. And it always varied. DeSantis was much stronger in his own state than he was in, say, another Republican stronghold state, like Alabama or Mississippi or Texas, right? And so my question is, are they rushing to judgment when it comes down to DeSantis? Because in my mind, Trump still sucks up all the oxygen out of the room. If Trump, I still believe that Trump will be the nominee in 2024. And not only that, but I think he's going to hand deliver Biden a second term. I know a lot of folks are saying that's just, I think Biden will get a second term. I'm saying that now.
If he runs against Trump, do you think the same if he runs against DeSantis?
That the thing is, it's all about Trump, though. Even if Trump doesn't get the nomination for the Republican Party, there'll still be Trump in the general election, taking away votes from DeSantis. So I think if I was DeSantis, I would even hold off and waiting until 28. Let Trump fizzle out, right? Let him, I guess, for one final time, show the Republican Party. Look, he lost them the House in 2018. He lost them the Senate and the presidency. He lost them governorships that they should have won. You're talking about Andy Beshear in Kentucky. You're talking about John Bel Edwards in Louisiana. Doug Jones.
Do you think that if Trump doesn't get the primary, do you think that he would run as an independent and expect people to come after him? Because if he did that, he would split the Republican Party.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't necessarily think he would run as an independent.
I think that's a long
to blame. But I do think, personally, I think a dream, which might not be so far-fetched, is that he and DeSantis are both Florida residents, and if one of them doesn't get the nomination, the sour grapes that proceed from that would lead to one of them not really trying to deliver Florida. But I think to answer your question about why DeSantis looks so attractive, you just kind of have to look at what happened on Tuesday night. A lot of DeSantis-backed candidates won. DeSantis aggressively redrew the congressional maps in Florida that provided a few pickups for Republicans to take back the House. And a lot of Trump-backed candidates lost. Trump backed Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, which was a big chance to hold on to a Senate seat. Dr. Oz lost, and Democrats picked that seat up. None of his backed candidates have picked up any seats, especially in Georgia, where Herschel Walker did not.
J.D. Vance, he supported J.D. Vance.
Well, Ohio is a red state anyway, but where Herschel Walker, for example, did not take out Warnock and is not in particularly good shape, in my opinion, for a runoff in December, or even further out west, where Mitch McConnell spent a lot of money trying to flip seats in Oregon and Colorado, but Trump didn't like either of the candidates there and may have played a role in their losses. Of course, Oregon and Colorado are very blue-leaning anyway, and it would take a very strong Republican year to do that. But you can again argue that Trump is the reason we didn't have a strong Republican year.
But are you saying
so the
Trump
divisiveness? I think a lot of strategists are saying Trump is the reason we didn't have a big red wave, and that's been echoed by certain personalities on Fox, on Newsmax, on OANN, which have historically been very pro-Trump outlets. Now, as far as losers go, to answer your earlier question, I think we have to include McConnell and McCarthy as losers. One, McConnell, because he was not able to take back the majority, and Kevin McCarthy, because the red wave he so hoped for didn't materialize. He's going to have to deal with a very tiny majority. And this is the same majority that denied him the speakership in 2015 and drove two speakers into retirement with much larger majorities in John Boehner and Paul Ryan. So already there's a little jockeying among the Republican caucus as to whether or not McCarthy should even be the speaker now, which doesn't necessarily bode well for his dream.
I think that's right. But I think, like Professor Foster, I think Trump is a big loser in this, and the Republican Party will continue to be a big loser, because I believe Donald Trump will burn the Republican Party down before he walks away. And that's a problem for the Republicans. That's the problem for Ron DeSantis, because he is going to damage Ron DeSantis his prospects for being a successful presidential candidate, because Donald Trump is about nothing but Donald Trump. He doesn't care about a Republican majority if it doesn't serve Donald Trump. He doesn't care about electing somebody because of their monetary policy or their tax policy or their health policy. He wants them elected because they will be obedient to Donald Trump. And he will, I believe, will burn this party down if he doesn't get what he wants. And that may be good for so-called Democrats, because that may make it easier for Joe Biden or whoever is the nominee to defeat the Republican. But I think that the Republicans are not done with Donald Trump yet. I think there are a lot of Republicans making noises about, well, it's time to move on, it's time to move on. But those same Republicans who jumped out there, that same kind of mentality allowed them to jump out there after January 6th and say, this is horrible, and Lindsey Graham, I'm through with him. When the base said, we're not through with him, those people, those leaders, those elected officials couldn't be through with him. And they're not done with Donald Trump yet. He's not going to let him go.
Right.
That's what thank you. Because I was saying, it's one thing for the political elite, right, on sitting around, talk about these things for a living, to say it's time to move on from Donald Trump. It's one thing for the donors. We talked about how many billionaires donated to the Republican Party last time we had the show. They can all agree, but you still have huge portions of the country still sold on this guy, right? This is beyond a political party. People have been comparing this to a cult for years now. And we've seen time and time again, since he came down those escalators, he has done nothing. Even in 2016, right? He lost the popular vote, right? And so how many times does the electorate have to reject the same guy? They rejected him in 2016. They rejected him in 2020. They're going to reject him again in 2024.
Wait, what do you mean rejected in 20? Or you mean just popular vote? We're not talking about who actually got elected and won the election.
The majority of human beings did not support Donald Trump. The majority,
but that doesn't have an effect as to who become president. But I take your point.
The electoral college, I know what you're saying, but we never had a scenario in American history where the electoral college helped the same candidate twice in a row, or even the same candidate, period. Like even W. Bush had to get the popular vote in 2004, right? You go to 1876, Samuel Tilden versus Rutherford B. Hayes, right? And that was seen as a corrupt bargain. But
this has been my primary beef with people with I'm not trying to call you a Democrat on the show, Mike. I'm not sure what role you're playing, but this is my problem with the Democratic side of the candidacy, is that so quickly to undermine such a grassroots movement just because they don't like the fertilizer that was used. But I just think you have to ask the question, why is this man mobilizing enough voters to win the Electoral College of the United States? Because it's not like you can
racism.
Hold on, Ishmael, I think your audio went out. But what I'm saying is, I agree with you, Ishmael. I think your audio went out, Ishmael. But I agree with you. I believe that this is a strong movement. But the problem that you have is that this movement does not reflect the majority of the country. And so while you were able to win in 2016, and even people have said Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate and that she should have gone to Wisconsin, it was only by very slim margins that she lose Wisconsin. And did she lose Pennsylvania and the Rust Belt, right? And so even though she lost, it was by a very slim margin. So you have to take that into consideration as well.
Well, I've said this on your program before, Michael. I don't think that Donald Trump has really created a movement. He's really created anything. I think he has recognized something and has exploited it. And that's okay, I guess. But I don't believe people are following him. He is reaffirming what they already believe. And that's a form of leadership, but he has not created a movement that's premised on anything except grievance, and mostly his grievance, his feeling of being wronged in one way or another. And that's a hard thing to sustain for very long. You can keep people jacked up on adrenaline for a while, but you can't do it for the long haul. You can't build a party around it. You can't build a philosophy of governance around it, because it'll exhaust itself. Much like Dr. Blaine talked about, there's just a lot of energy, but it's not productive. And I think that he will continue to agitate people because I think he really he's so self-centered. He can only focus on himself. He's really not interested in building a party apparatus that has some longevity. And that's why his autocratic behavior is the way to short circuit that. I don't have to build an apparatus if I make myself king and I don't ever have to stand for re-election. I mean,
But that's the thing that's so terrifying, Professor Cook, is that he tapped into something that's been present in our society that I thought we had sort of gotten past. But that's what really terrifies me. So Nate said racism. I experience it a lot as anti-Semitism. He's pulled those strings, and there's enough people who respond to that and say, oh, we can bash the Jews now, we can bash the blacks now, we can bash that, we don't have to be tolerant of people who are gay. Oh yeah, let's go for that. And that's what's really frightening to me, is because if that wasn't present in the psyche of our population, he wouldn't have gotten anywhere.
Can also emphasize that a big loser was also New York Democrats. But before I pivot to New York Democrats, let me just put some numbers out there. This is why Tim Ryan, I thought, ran in such a great race. He was able to pick up counties that Trump in 2020 won, like Lorain County. He also, the margin between him and Vance, JD Vance, in counties like Lucas, where Toledo, Ohio is located, was wider because he had 59.6% for Ryan, 40.4% for Vance. That was wider than the margin between Biden and Trump 2 years ago. Biden 2 years ago was at 40.8%, but Trump was at 57.5%. Athens County was 59.9% for Ryan and 40.1% for Vance. So in 2020, that same county split for Biden at a less margin. And so imagine what could have happened, what the result would have been if the DNC pay a little bit more attention. And also Sherry Beasley. Sherry Beasley's race really got close, I think, around late October. And before, it was like a bygone conclusion. Ted Bunn is going to succeed Richard Burr. But look at how close it was. 50.7%, right, to 47.1%. You can't help but wonder, what if? But going back to the Democrats in New York, there were a lot of folks getting nervous with that governor race, right? You had Lee Zeldin getting in help. He got the governor of Virginia flying in. He got DeSantis coming in. And there were a lot of Democrats concerned, right? Crime was the number one thing that Lee Zeldin, who is an election denier, capitalized on. And so many folks are saying, Democrats should have won much more handedly against their Republican opponents. Even though Kathy Hochul eked out a win, right? She should have won by a much larger margin. You had the Republicans' hopes in getting the House of Representatives running through the state of New York, a very blue Democratic bastion. Sean Patrick Maloney, the head of the committee to get members of the House of Representatives elected from the Democratic Party, lost his own race, and that bolstered the GOP's opportunity to reclaim the congressional majority. So I want to get your thoughts on New York. We talked about crime last time a little bit more than we should have, but what are your thoughts on the New York races? You have AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, calling for there to be some accountability. She's saying that the New York State Democratic Party's corruption has cost the Democrats the House, and she's called for the head of the New York State Democratic Party to resign in the wake of the catastrophic performance by Democrats in the state in the midterm elections.
I think AOC is 100% right. Andrew Cuomo and the Cuomo family have been fixtures in the New York State Democratic Party for a very long time. Cuomo was effectively his father's campaign manager when he first ran for governor in the late 80s, I believe. So since then, his father was governor for 12 years. Andrew Cuomo was attorney general. Then he became governor, and he himself was governor for 10 years. And Cuomo, as we are all familiar with, was more concerned with his cementing his own power and his own influence in New York more than he was with the business of governing. And nothing makes that more clear than the fact that when he first became governor, he brokered a deal between upstate conservative Democrats and Republicans that handed Republicans control of the state Senate. And one of the ways this manifested was that Andrew Cuomo appointed a bunch of conservatives to the Court of Appeals, New York State's highest court. The same court, by the way, and the same exact majority that he appointed, which struck down the Democratic drawn map that would have given Democrats a 24-3 or something like that advantage in congressional districts. So, you know, that's one way to look at it. Another way is that Kathy Hochul got some pretty bad advice as to who she was going to run with. Her original lieutenant governor was from the city, but when he got arrested for corruption, she chose Antonio Delgado, a very popular upstate Democrat. Kathy Hochul's already from Buffalo. One of the very smart things Cuomo did was that since he's from the city, he chose Kathy Hochul because she's from upstate. So you have that upstate-downstate ticket balance. And these are things that matter in New York. So Kathy Hochul had 2 upstaters. Lee Zeldin is a very well-respected Republican on Long Island, unfortunately. And so he was able to run up big numbers on Long Island and in the city suburbs. And that had a huge role in flipping the 2 previously democratically held districts on Long Island over to the Republicans. And the one that really shocked me was the 4th district, because that's an area that does have one of the major cities in New York. And it's an area that does have a lot of Black voters. So when you look at all of this and the fact that the Democratic Party in New York especially has a history of, you know, supporting itself over allowing progressives the chance to grow and develop, and that squeezes out minor candidates, New York Democrats do have a lot of soul searching to do.
Well, you know, I mean, you can look at it another way, Nate, and I hear what you're saying. I don't disagree with you. I think the Democratic Party apparatus in New York has for a long time been corrupt and sort of incestuous and self-serving. But New York is a difficult state to govern because aside from New York City, you don't have a particularly liberal progressive populace in the state. And what made New York work was the thing that you criticize, and I get it, is that Andrew Cuomo, his father, and other governors have run that party with an iron fist. They have made people do what they wanted them to do, and they kept people in line. And Kathy Hochul isn't that kind of politician. She doesn't have that stroke. So some of these losses are the result of people not being coerced the way they have traditionally been coerced to produce for the party, to turn out for the party. Now, I believe that that's a bad way to do business. So I'm not condoning it. My observation is that's been New York politics for 50 or more years, and now this election is a result of people having a bit more latitude, a lot less coercion, and it didn't work for the Republicans. I mean, it didn't work for the Democrats. They didn't turn out the vote. They didn't do the things they've traditionally done to make sure they won those elections. That map they drew was kind of the last gasp of old style politics, because I hear what you said about conservative judges. No judge should have approved that map. That map was horrible. Okay, that map is a version of what DeSantis did in Florida. That map is just wrong, but they did it and it didn't work. But I think that New York politics is changing, and the Democrats in New York are going to have to make some serious adjustments if they want to be successful, because there's a lot of conservative, Republican, even if you want to call them that, voters and politicians in New York that happen not to be in New York City or in the New York metropolitan area, and that's always been their problem.
I think New Yorkers, at least, I mean, I've lived in New York most of my life, and you know, we tend to take for granted that it's a blue state and that it's democratic and that it's liberal, and you know, we would never do some of the things that we see in other places. But so you know, I think there's a certain lax attitude about whether they need to get out and vote, the Democrats. And but I mean, I have personally noticed in the last few years that here on Long Island there are places that are very much the MAGA mentality, which is like shocking to me. And so I think that that's changed a bit.
What do you mean when you say MAGA mentality? Because I'm still perturbed at the way the last conversation wrapped up, as if the only reason people vote for Trump is because he unlocked the inner racism or anti-Semitism inside of them. Like, so I'm still just shocked and awed by by the way, that conversation.
Well, it's like what Dr. Cook said. New York City is very blue, but the city suburbs themselves tend to be a bit more swingy. And on Long Island, you get progressively more conservative the further east you go. So, you know,
I mean, we've had marches and parades with MAGA flags and everything else.
Anti-vax parades not too far from where I live as well.
And that was in Suffolk, and it was like, oh my God, like it was hard to just cross the street. So,
I'm from Dutchess County, New York, which is 100 miles north of New York City, and I live in Huntsville, Alabama. As a Black man, I feel more comfortable in Huntsville, Alabama than I did in Hyde Park, New York.
That's
there's a very big, very strong conservative. Where I lived in Hyde Park, New York, my mother had a friend, Mrs. Pagano. Mrs. Pagano would say that, Preston, there are 3 Democrats here in Dutchess County. Your family, my family, and Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt, as you know, has been dead since 1945. So that's what upstate New York is like. It's very conservative, and it's very aggressively conservative. And so is Suffolk County, Long Island. Mm-hmm. So it's not a lock that New York will stay blue if the vote doesn't turn out. And in New York City, where crime is an issue, the vote is getting more moderate. So it doesn't bode well for Democrats unless there's a generational change. And what Howard Dean used to say, if people start acting like the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party and tell people why you need to vote for them besides just affiliation.
Yeah. I mean, so we talked a little bit about crime last time, and I don't want to go into all that again, but crime in the city, and I wouldn't say I blame this on Republicans or Democrats. I don't really know how people do that and get away with it, but we're suddenly hearing about, for a while there, it was like every other day someone being stabbed on the subway platform or thrown into the tracks. So when I was a teenager, my mother wouldn't let me go to the city. She said it was too dangerous. So this was the 70s, the early 70s. And she said, if you go, don't wear earrings because the earrings, they'll if they want to rob you, they'll grab it right out of your ear and rip your earlobe. Don't wear a necklace. They'll rip it off there was like this paranoia. I don't know if it was true or not. Like, what did I know? Don't go to the city. When I moved away, I lived in Texas for 10 years. I came back. And things were different. I couldn't understand. Oh, you're not afraid to go to the city? No, we go to the city all the time. The city got cleaned up. And, I hate to say it, but it got cleaned up under Republican mayor. And so Giuliani, who I can't stand, was really good for New York City for a while. He took us through 9/11 and crime went down. Now, there was a lot of collateral damage with that. But he did make the city a lot safer for the average person walking around. Now, he turned out to be words that I can't really say on public. I don't want to actually express my feelings about Rudy Giuliani, but I'll do it in private if you wish. But so sometimes bad people can do good things. And I was thinking, we were talking about Andrew Cuomo. For all of his whatever he did with women, or he was really good for New York when the pandemic first came out. And yes, he made a huge mistake over the nursing homes and everybody blames him. But how many states in the United States made big mistakes over all kinds of things when the pandemic started? But he was a hero for us because he kept everything on track. We all tuned in to see what was, he was honest. He was honest about it. And he told us, and he, so
was he honest about the nursing homes?
I said, so Ish, relax, Ish, take it easy. I said he made some big mistakes with the nursing homes, and every single.
But that shows pure hubris, in my opinion.
Every politician made mistakes with COVID-19 in the beginning, and so I don't think anybody handled it perfectly. We didn't know what the hell we were doing.
Well,
But
so I just want to jump in real quick because I'm just going to push back a little bit. Using the term "made mistakes," I grant you, Andrew Cuomo handled COVID overall very well. But when you say makes mistakes in regards to suppressing news of deaths in nursing homes because it was more convenient for him to handle it that way, I think that I take issue
I
with
wasn't
you.
talking about his suppressing the news. I'm talking about the fact that when a
Well, he did
patient
all
came
of
out of the
it.
hospital, they went right back to the nursing home, and then they started infecting everyone else in the nursing home. And that
Yes,
was,
and he tried to suppress that information so people couldn't find out about it. I would push back at just using the term mistake because he killed
Or
people.
honest.
You know, but
are
also,
there any honest
I think the
politicians?
point Dr.
I
Blaine
wanted
is
to
trying to
mention
make
in
is
case
that,
there's some other
with
questions
honesty
about-
at least, is that Cuomo was one of the first politicians to really appreciate the scope of what
No, let's just say
what
he
COVID
did
looks
masks
like,
and vaccines,
but-
and that's what the Democratic Party wants. That's why you think he's
well,
good.
it's not. It's
because
more
he
than
did
just masks and
for
vaccines. He was one of the
indefinite
first
time.
to actually appreciate the scope that said, "Hey, wait a second, this isn't just the flu. This is
And
serious."
for those
I
who
remember
didn't
being-
appreciate the
And
scope,
in
to
school
enforce
bad
certain
did they
things
do?
like masks and
I remember being
quarantines
in
and things
school and
like
coming
that.
back home to Long Island, and suddenly
It was
seeing
nice
the
and
news
locked
and
down.
the Cuomo news conferences, and that was a big deal. And for a time, at least, a lot of Democrats were saying maybe we should kick at Joe Biden off the top of the ballot and replace him with Cuomo. So I do
Right.
understand that, and he did understand how to govern as much as he didn't necessarily care for that as much as he did his own personal appearance. But
Right.
the way he governed the Democratic Party for so long, and the fact that he's no longer at the top of the New York Democratic Party, I should specify, means that they have to do an internal autopsy to determine how they're going to be such a force and continue to be such a force without such a powerful figure at the top.
And
So-
one thing that's always a puzzle to me is when a Democrat
Mistakes were
does
made.
something.
I like that expression from Vietnam and from the war in Iraq is that the government officials tell us, well, mistakes were made.
I'm sorry, poor choice of words, but yeah.
No, I'm just yanking your chain, Dr. Blaine. I think you're right. I mean, look, he did a lot of good things, but the thing that we keep sort of confusing, and people do it about Donald John Trump. Nobody is perfectly good or bad. So good people can do bad things. Bad people can do good things. I mean, it's possible to have those dichotomies exist in the same human.
The thing that surprises me is that when a Democrat does something bad, everybody accuses and wants to impeach and everything else, but when a Republican does something bad, it doesn't seem to have the same weight. I mean, if Donald Trump were a Democrat, he'd be in prison right now.
They spent the first 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency doing a congressional investigation that yielded no charges.
But nothing
him.
happened.
He was a
Nothing
criminal.
happened, Ish.
No, but I'm
Nothing
saying that it was
happened.
even we're taking away the outcome-based and facts-based result of that. It was a political failure for the Democrats. It was unquestionably a political failure for the Democrats, and it was.
I mean, look at Bill Clinton. He got
unless they just want to
because
obfuscate
he
and
had
obstruct the office of the presidency, I don't see how it was anything other than a failure.
But
I
let's
mean,
be-
it amazes me that Bill Clinton got impeached because of an indiscretion, which I think was disgusting. But I also think it was none of my business. Like, why did I know about him and his intern? It was not my business, and it shouldn't have made it. But look at what Donald Trump's done, and nobody cares. It's like, oh yeah, so
but look at what he has done.
Pay off a few women, the things he's said about women, and
But
I would like to hear what Ish said he has done. I'm interested in what
I'm
has
with
he
you,
done.
I'm with you, Professor Foster.
Yeah.
But and so I just want to. I don't like to have to defend Donald Trump because as a Muslim man, to see what he did to so many close Muslim families that I knew the second he got elected and got those powers. And I was the first one down protesting at O'Hare Airport when he enacted that ban. But since then, I haven't turned my mind off when it comes to this man after all the things he initially did. When I was sure he wouldn't get elected when he said what he said about Muslims on the campaign trail, I was wrong. But since then, I've come to understand that one of the things that galvanizes him amongst the American people is that he's not afraid to tell people in the Democratic Party who have strongholds in higher education in America, who have strongholds in mainstream media in America, he's not afraid to tell them, no, what you're talking about, I'm not accepting it. Because the way those institutions like to talk and behave is as if they have the truth sent from down upon high and they're dictating it to the rest of the population. So that's why he was able to galvanize enough people to win the Electoral College and win the presidency. You seen earlier, it sounded like we wanted to write it off because he didn't get a couple extra 100,000, a million votes when he got hundreds of millions of votes. Like that.
No, not hundreds of millions ish. Keep it in perspective. He got 7 million votes.
Who? That Donald Trump got 7 million votes to win the
No,
presidency?
it's not hundreds of millions of votes. He didn't get that. But
I thought he got 200. I thought he got 200 to win. Or no?
No, that didn't happen.
I apologize.
But look, I'm gonna be the law professor, and I'm gonna say,
okay.
I'm gonna say this to you. Professor Foster asked you a question to list the accomplishments, and when you're at the Court of Appeals and the judge asks you to answer a question, you need to answer the question. So the question is the accomplishments, please.
I would like to take a recess to go do some more research. But I'm dealing with the court of public opinion because I'm the one, like I said on the show last time, a Howard professor in the classroom told me that women weren't the only gender to have children. That's what he's fighting.
You're moving off the point. Now,
that's one of his accomplishments.
The question was the list of the accomplishments, not other grievances.
Okay, I'm going to help you, Ish. This is what Donald Trump did. He cut taxes on the rich permanently, and he cut taxes on everybody else temporarily and raised them. He did do criminal justice reform.
He did do that.
But Professor.
He also destroyed American democracy. So
I also have to say, as someone who
he destroyed what?
I think that's a net loss.
I also do have to say, as someone who worked as a clinic intern during the COVID pandemic, helping people with their Board of Prison Reviews under the CARES Act, that a lot of Trump's criminal justice reform was not all it was cracked up to be in the first place. So, I just do have to put that in there.
So, Nate, in addition to that, Professor, I spoke to, we had Professor Rogers on the show when we talked about the economy. In Professor Rogers' class, he brought in two policy individuals who were working on the policy of the bill that Donald Trump signed and wanted to celebrate during the Republican convention in summer of 2020. She said that bill was ready to go to Obama's desk before Trump even got into the White House. And Mitch McConnell continued to use Senate tactics to stall and to delay and to prevent that bill from going onto his desk. And I've heard people in barbershops complain Obama didn't do anything for the African-American community. They need to read, because Mitch McConnell used the power in the Senate to stop that bill from going onto Obama's desk. Obama used what was available to him at the time was executive action, and he used that executive action to do his best to, I guess, reduce the amount of folks who were incarcerated for crimes that pertain to narcotics, right? And that was like around 2015, 2016. But in addition to what's been said, just to put it back to, what this means for the House of Representatives, Maloney's defeat, Sean Patrick Maloney's defeat, wasn't an anomaly. We saw the Democrats going into, hold on, Nate. Democrats were heading into this Tuesday expecting to snatch 3 seats from Republicans following a decennial redistricting program this year. But instead, the head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee lost his own seat. Now it looks like the Republicans are going to take a slim majority in the House of Representatives. And there's even talk of Nancy Pelosi retiring. And she's also pointing to the fact that her husband is still recuperating from the recent attack, and that might serve as motivation for her to retire. And then the question becomes, okay, now who's going to lead the House of Representatives? There's all this talk about let's rush to younger folks, right? But who has the same effectiveness? Who has the same political savvy, skills as someone like a Nancy Pelosi? I mean, think about the legislative record, right? It wasn't a bygone conclusion that all the Democrats were going to be on board for the Inflation Reduction Act. You had some folks saying this is too little. You had a lot of folks saying this is too much, right? So how do you get someone who's able to get everyone on board at the end of the day to get legislative wins through? Nate, you were going to say something?
I think Maloney's loss is is an aberration in that he is the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and he managed to lose his seat, which is incredibly rare. Also, in that his district his district incorporated a little bit more of the more liberal-leaning Westchester County portions of Westchester County that elected Mondaire Jones previously. He actually kind of pushed Mondaire Jones out of Congress, so I'm not too mad to see him go, even if it did cost the Democrats their majority in some way. But I think his district will be a prime pickup opportunity for Democrats in 24. Now, to answer your second question, as far as Pelosi's retirement, I think the frontrunner would have to be Hakeem Jeffries of Brooklyn. He's someone who the current leadership team is very familiar with because he's part of it. He'd probably have the blessing of Pelosi and Clyburn and Hoyer themselves, as well as the prominent factions within the Democratic Party, the Congressional Black Caucus. He might be able to peel off some votes from the Congressional Progressive Caucus and so on and so forth. So I think he's the big name to look out for as far as leadership goes.
Agreed.
I think that the CBC is the largest caucus among the Democratic caucus. Okay, whereas some of the members of the other caucuses have lost one or two members, the CBC has actually gained a member. So the fight really is Hakeem Jeffries or Adam Schiff, and Adam Schiff has wanted to be Speaker for a very long time. And part of the reason that Benny Tompkins is chair of the January 6th committee is Nancy Pelosi's message to Adam Schiff that you are not going to be Speaker just because you want to be, because he wanted that job to help shine for being Speaker. So both Mr. Clyburn and Ms. Pelosi have fundamentally agreed to step aside for new leadership. Steny Hoyer, however, has not. And he is the same age cohort as Ms. Pelosi and Mr. Clyburn. And the CBC is fundamentally supporting Hakeem. Other members are, but there are people who don't think Hakeem is progressive enough, and there are members of the caucus who think Hakeem is too progressive. So it's going to be a struggle. But he is the name right now, which is probably a problem because he's got a bigger target on his back. But I think you got to see what Mr. Schiff is going to do with the relatively large California delegation, which is varied. They're not a unified caucus, but they are from California. And if the Speaker is from California, they get stuff. So maybe they'll be inclined to support Adam Schiff.
How does Biden move forward legislatively, right, with a Republican House, right, who has pledged to do everything they could to launch investigations into Afghanistan, into his son, to try to impeach him, right? They've already made up in their mind they're going to impeach him before they even get in. How does he move forward legislatively? There's a lot that he still wants to get done. He's mentioned repeatedly that he wants to have an assault ban on military grade rifles, right? He also wants to codify Roe versus Wade. He wants to take action on voting rights. How do those things even materialize or even come close to being materialized if you have such a hostile group of Republicans? And we've talked about this election, and everyone's talked about it as a repudiation of extremism and those who want to overturn elections, but you still have Lauren Boebert coming out today, like on top, still against her opponent. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene returning, and then she's going to be getting committee assignments. Kevin McCarthy said, well, she is going to be getting committee assignments. She's a duly elected representative. You have folks who, even Carrie Lake, right? It looked at one time that Hobbs was going to take it, and then next Carrie Lake is now narrowing that gap. And so how does the Biden administration move forward in such an environment, even if you have the Senate?
You don't.
Well, I'm just going to say,
the market's like that.
I took a pot shot earlier at President Biden for being, quite an old man. But the other thing is that age has come with experience. He spent decades in the Senate, and he did learn how to get some stuff done. And we have seen that over the past year, 2 years, he has managed to get some things done. When he was vice president, he was quite often sent by President Obama to Congress to try to get stuff done. So I don't think it's particularly likely, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he will find a way to get some things forward. It's not going to be everything that he wants. It's not going to be everything that we want. Certainly not everything I want, but I do think he will find a way to reach across the aisle to some of the new Congress and make some progress, especially if he keeps hold of the Senate.
Yeah, I think in terms of substance, he's not going to get anything done, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't do what Harry Truman used to do, is give them hell anyway, to serve up bills and proposals for them to do nothing with, and then give them hell about it. There's nothing wrong with being political. And I think that's why Biden looks old to many people, is that he is who he is. He is I'm trying to think of the word, but he's basically a stand-in for sanity. And that's nice, but it doesn't work in terms of moving the ball forward, especially when you don't have both houses of Congress. You've got to be assertive politically. You have to push the opposition back on their heels and make them defend things that are indefensible. One of the big surprises is that in red states that abortion won, and so you have to push this abortion issue hard, because you have to propose a national abortion rights bill and make them push back against it, make them defend what hurts them. That seems to be a lost art in the Democratic Party, just playing politics. And I'd like to see Joe Biden, be free. Joe, you're going into what will be your last election, win or lose. So act like you're free, because you are. You have a tremendous record of legislative record to run on. When they stop you, when they stalemate you, hold them to the fire for that. Tell America we're not moving forward because these people who have no alternatives, the fact that there's been no alternative to Obamacare, since Obamacare, they keep saying we have alternatives. Make them play their cards.
Yeah. And to your point, Professor, during the days.
Right. I mean, that it's the politics of it. The politics of it that people don't like to see, like us, because you want the government to do something to address the issues in life that you think ought to be addressed. But the politics of it is that when you have control of the House and the Senate, the argument is, look at us, look at what we did, look at how we have improved things. And when you don't have control, the argument is, look at them and look at how they're being obstructions. And that's what Joe Biden has got to do for the next 2 years. He's got to turn this into, look at these brickheads, because then he, if he runs again, or whoever is the Democrat Party nominee, can say, give me more Democrats. I will change this because these guys are brickheads. And it's really politics 101. And it's a different mentality for the elected officials on the Hill than it is for us as consumers. We want them to do stuff. We want things. We want this legislation. We want this issue addressed. And what they're trying to do is to stay elected. Okay. And the rule is, you stay elected when you can talk about the things you did, and you stay elected when you can talk about the things the other guys didn't let you get done.
And to your point, Professor, when you mentioned Harry Truman, it made me think during the days when presidents used to go on whistle-stop tours, folks used to yell out to Harry Truman, I think in 1948, the election against Dewey, give him hell, Harry. And he responded, I don't give them hell. I give them the truth, and they think it's hell.
I
he
love
also
that one. I love that line.
he- he-
Mike,
go ahead.
can I ask you what because I think the professors raise a great point as to still Biden putting forth strong political arguments and having the Republicans stand in the way of good policy. What policy would you think would be the best? I think healthcare, which Professor Foster raises, is a solid one. What other policies do you think Biden has such high ground on that the Republicans would be harmed if they stayed in the way of it?
Well, I think number one,
Abortion.
yeah, I was going to say, because he made the promise already. Look, Democrats' priority legislatively, if we win, is going to be codifying Roe versus Wade. Okay, we didn't win the way we wanted to, but the people still showed up in large numbers for the Democratic Party, so that should behoove him to move forward with the legislation. Take it to the mat, right? Use the bully pulpit, campaign, right? Go around the country, have these town halls. Publicly put the Republicans on blast. I think effectively the same way you put the hypocrisy on blast with those who are saying student loan forgiveness is unfair, yet they got millions in PPP loans forgiven. Use that kind of same energy when it comes down to abortion. And I think democracy is the next thing, right? A lot of folks, criticized him. That's going to not hit people, as you intend, because people are thinking about their pocketbooks. They're thinking about gas prices. Well, guess what? People care about how elections are run. They care about ensuring that we have winners and losers in our system. So voting rights, I think, is the next thing. And maybe you won't get the full scale John Lewis voting rights bill. Get a small portion of it. Get something, right? Because unless we have the restoration of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, we'll never have the full protections that, we once had. We'll never have the, amount of people who need to participate, but get something done, codified. Push, I guess, a national movement to get states to enact laws that affect their voting rights. So I think those are two effective things he should start the new year with. And of course, the one big thing that the uncertainty behind who controls Congress right now is causing is, whether or not we'll be able to, get the extension for the country to pay its loans, right? And that's another thing. People are saying, there's a lot of uncertainty in Wall Street. Professor, go ahead. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Professor. You're on mute, Professor.
And then, real quickly, don't ignore the obvious, Democrats. Just propose middle-class tax cuts. We say it wrong. I'm a Democrat, so that's why I'm saying we. We say raise taxes on the rich. No, just say cut taxes on working class people. If they ask you how you're going to pay for it, then say raise taxes on the rich. But the issue is middle class tax cuts for working class people. How can a Republican counter that argument?
You should run for something, Professor. No, I was kidding.
I'm thinking about it.
The issue is also, there's
You have my vote, Professor Foster.
there's been a lot of uncertainty about the debt ceiling. People don't know. There's still no definite answer as to who's going to control the House. Even though the Republicans are poised to take it, it's still uncertain. Anything could happen. You've got seats in California. I think you got about 5 seats in California that are up for grabs. I think the Democrats' majority, are poised to win those. But this also, the lack of certainty. Here we are on a Thursday, right? And we don't have the full picture of what election 2022 means.
I think that's great, Mike. I think that's really great for politics moving forward. People care now. People care now about like this is like I feel like this is maybe I'm just getting older. Maybe maybe it's not new. Maybe it's not more than I've ever seen. Maybe I'm just getting older. But I feel like it is in the conversation. People want to know who has. I may just be getting older, but I don't know. I feel like that when Trump came, and we've seen it with some of the relative voter turnout numbers, we're trending in the right direction. And as we talked about on the last show, civic engagement and people caring about what their elected officials do, I think will be better for the entire country, because I think we're encouraged about the voters shying away from extremism, such as not accepting the results of a duly announced election. So I'm encouraged by the enthusiasm around politics, because the key to it all for me is civic engagement and building families. I think in education, education will work wonders. And I think getting people to care you have to get that first.
So to end the night off, I do want to get your take on the Georgia Senate runoff that's going to take place on December 6th. You had Ted Cruz come into the state of Georgia. Georgia is really looking like it's become the new Iowa. So, this state has gotten a lot of political attention, and it continues to get some as we're heading into another runoff. Raphael Warnock is telling his supporters, just hang on with me for more weeks. Herschel Walker is saying, I told you it was going to be a tough race. And then he also said a bunch of whatever flew in his head. But Georgia, again, is the key to control of the U.S. Senate, as incumbent Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker are heading into a December 6th runoff with more than 3.9 million votes reported and more left to count. Neither candidate was above the 50% threshold needed to win outright under Georgia law. And this sets up a post-Thanksgiving showdown in what is already the country's most expensive Senate race. A lot of money has been spent in this election cycle. We talked about that last time. But, the fact that it was this close, I was telling Nate, I think you could have put a chicken sandwich against Raphael Warnock, and it still would have been this close, because at the end of the day, they didn't care about the fact that Herschel Walker didn't have a legislative background. They didn't care about whether or not he, Professor Cook mentioned it, whether or not he paid for abortions or any of the things that we see constantly in front of us here in Georgia in these ads. And now they're bringing in the big guns. Ted Cruz is coming in. You've got, the lieutenant governor of Georgia saying, Donald Trump, stay out of Georgia. We want DeSantis to come in. We want to keep Trump out of the news. We want to make this all about Georgia and making sure that we get this guy across the finish line. What are your thoughts? And, I guess if you have any takes or predictions, what are those as well?
It sounds like it should be a good proxy. Like if I think the race gets much more exciting if the Republican Party makes a conscious effort to just do a focus group, do a test case for DeSantis versus Trump. And I'm not a Republican, but I've been leaning that way over the last couple of years, especially after just personal experiences. But I just, as someone who's interested in evaluating both political parties, I want to see how the Republicans would do with a candidate like DeSantis, who is combating some of the cultural or societal, extremism, while not being politically extreme as to denounce, fair elections. So I really hope they swap in DeSantis so we get a good test of what his political weight is.
I think a DeSantis-Trump proxy war is exactly what Raphael Warnock is hoping for, because if that becomes the story, that allows him to kind of run away with it. I think Warnock has the advantage in the runoff because we saw him do very well in the Atlanta suburbs. And, to answer your point, Mike, about how it's so close, Georgia didn't start to look like a swing state until very recently, right? Like some of these Atlanta suburbs, like Cobb County is where Newt Gingrich is from, and he was Speaker of the House for a good amount of time. And now it's a solidly Democratic county. Clayton County is where the lawsuit that led to the Supreme Court ruling that trans people are covered under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act originated. So, Georgia has really become a much more viable place for Democrats in a very short amount of time, but it's still a very swingy state. Now, I looked into there was a libertarian candidate who got 2% of the vote, which is what kept neither candidate from reaching 50%. And I looked into him a little bit, and he was a very trans rights, kind of candidate. So I think most of his voters would be inclined to back Warnock anyway. But I give the advantage to Warnock, especially because one of the big things I saw on Tuesday night was that he did very well in counties that he lost in the runoff in 2021, where he still won the race anyway. So I think Warnock is in much better shape. He ran the exact kind of campaign where he needed to run. And Georgia Republicans will already tell you that Warnock is a very, very difficult politician to run against.
And I agree with everything that's been said, but just going back to maybe the original question of the night, maybe the biggest loser was Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams was one of the brightest lights in the Democratic Party, thought to be a potential Democratic presidential nominee. And after taking 2 losses, after Warnock either wins or at least qualifies for a runoff on the same ballot, is not a good look for Ms. Abrams.
But Professor, don't you agree that she has too much talent, right? Even though she may not be Georgia's pick this time. And even though she may have done better in the 2018 race than she did in the 2020 race, you know, the fact that she was able to mobilize so much vote. I mean, every time you look at Senators Ossoff and Warnock, that's the legacy of Stacey Abrams. So wouldn't she, I guess, make a potential great DNC chair or someone else on the something on the national stage to help the party whip out the vote in the South? Because think about it, before Beto O'Rourke and before Stacey Abrams, you know, we didn't have much. The Democratic Party did not have much leadership in the South, it seemed to me.
Stacey Abrams is a star. She did something very important in terms of mobilizing people at a grassroots level through a series of coalitions and organizations she worked with and built, and got people registered and got people to actually vote. And we are forever, I think, in her debt for that. The problem in politics is if you lose twice, you're a loser, and that I don't think gives her much of a future for elected office. I think that for the DNC, she is way too progressive for the DNC. They could not deal with her and the things she would like the DNC to do in terms of making the investments in minority communities, in poor communities on a consistent basis, as opposed to, 6 months out from the election. So I don't think that apparatus would ever be able to accommodate Stacey Abrams, and I don't think she could accommodate them. I think it would just be a bad marriage. So I think that she is going to have to sort of figure out what she wants to do. Obviously, it's her choice. But I think elective office at the statewide level, elective office on a national level is probably not in her future, because she's got 2 L's. And that usually doesn't mean that you get elected the third time around.
Yeah, I would echo that same sentiment. I think I've sort of imagined her becoming a sort of a liberal, a more liberal James Carville-like figure sometime along the future, an organizer, a strategist, but especially after a second loss and a more crushing loss, I don't see her taking a position or a position we thought she might have taken in the future. Same thing with Beto O'Rourke. I mean, he did as well as he did, and he lost. That first big national election when it was against Ted Cruz, who again is one of the most disliked figures in the country. He's not, he was popular enough in Texas to keep winning, but he's still not even all that popular even within Texas. I'm not really sure why they thought it was a great idea to bring him into Georgia, and because I know he is popular with some people, but I don't know that the Ted Cruz bump was going to get anybody across the line, even in Georgia. But Beto's lost a couple of times now. I don't see him being the star of the Democratic Party that we once thought he might have been. I don't see Stacey Abrams being quite that kind of star. I think they're good at getting some people motivated to go out, but I'm not sure that it's for them.
But could both of these individuals start at Congress? Could they win congressional seats?
Where are the seats? The seat that Stacey Abrams would have run for would have been John Lewis's old seat, and that's currently filled by the chair of the Georgia Democratic Party, Nakima Williams. Okay. Yeah. And I think the big opportunity for me personally that Stacey Abrams whiffed on was when she didn't run for Senate in 2020, because Chuck Schumer was very heavily recruiting her. She had just given a big speech for the 2019 State of the Union that everyone saw her potentials, but she prioritized a rematch against Kemp and, lost by a wider margin. I think the big problem for her now is, where does she go from here? Does she try to run for mayor of Atlanta, which is kind of small potatoes compared to governor of Georgia?
She needs to be leading people somewhere. Like, I just see so much.
I think I would like to see her in some kind of office, but there's a very narrow path for her. Like Professor Cook said, you lose twice, you don't usually get a third chance. Look how long Joe Biden ran for president 3 times, and look how hard it was for him to get the nomination. Look how long it took between his first run and the time he was politically viable enough for a third.
No, but I just fully agree. Stacey Abrams, I think, is a star to agree with Professor Cook, and I really hope that someone who just genuinely seems to embrace the role of a citizen and her civic responsibility with such grace. I really do hope that she has a place on the national political stage at some point.
So Biden got a lot of flack in the press conference for saying that he wouldn't do anything differently when asked. Do you think that was a mistake? A lot of folks said that was disrespectful to the electorate because he's polling low currently. I thought it made sense. It's like the Democratic Party's legislative agenda has been popular. When you take each individual piece, the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, the PACT Act, all of those things poll well among the American public. So why would you do anything differently if what you've been producing has been popular, despite your current personal polling numbers? So do you think it was a mistake for him to say in the press conference, I wouldn't do anything differently, in the aftermath of the election?
I mean,
No,
what do you say otherwise?
Yeah, I think the Democrats exceeded expectations, and to Zach's point, why would you concede a mistake? If the Democrats hold the Senate, I think it's really kind of astounding that things aren't worse than they are given inflation, et cetera. So I think Joe Biden is, as you pointed out at the top, Michael, he's continually underestimated and discounted, mostly because of the optics. But his record has been very strong, and I wouldn't run away from it.
Don't most midterm elections go against the sitting president and the party? So this one did not do that. So I think that he actually did very well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether it was because he's Biden or not is, up for grabs, but I don't like why.
We're not. No, I'm just kidding. No. Maybe I'm being facetious. No, I think it was a great. And then Inflation Reduction Act, I think, is such a great start on the right way towards climate policy. So, I didn't have a horse in the race, but you wouldn't believe that from listening to me the last few weeks. But
Well, Zach, Professor Cook, Professor Foster, Nate, Ishmael, Dr. Blaine, thank you so much for what you brought tonight. This was a very, I think, thorough discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a diverse discussion. It was lively at times, but we always are able to walk away learning from each other, and that's one thing I appreciate about this platform. All views are welcome, as long as we're just remaining respectful of one another and proving that we can have political discourse, right? So thank you all for what you brought to the table. I'm so grateful to each of you for dedicating time. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and I just want to also, as I always do every night, challenge the sources of news that you plug into, folks. There's a lot of misinformation that's been spread. We're in an age where people can't tell truth from error. And so the platform was born out of, having a repository where people can talk about facts, right? And so challenge the sources that you do plug into. With that being said, I will conclude.
That's the whole reason I wrote this. Challenge the sources. Wait a minute, where are we? Challenge the sources of what you're told.
I want to put a plug in for Dr. Blaine's book, Undue Influences. Order it. It's an excellent read. And it takes place in the future.
Okay.
I think 2032 is the year it takes place.
So this one takes place in 2020.
2020. Okay.
This one takes place in 2022.
I can see
And it's
that
not a
you made a
free
mistake, Mike.
site.
We got two.
And how about
One. Thank you all.
They go together. One's the sequel.
Thank you all so much for what you brought.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. It was really my pleasure to be with you again tonight.
Thank you.
Mike.
Episode 83 of the Poco Mike. Thank you all so much.